afternoon. Today's video is going to be on the 6 sources of identity. It's going to be one in a series for instructing counselors and lay people on not only the seriousness of dissociative identity disorder, but more importantly, how to understand it, how to treat it, and how to overcome it. I have been strongly criticized by many people when I wrote the book, on the complete big book of dissociative identity disorder, because it is Christ-centered. It has too much religion in it, people say, but actually it doesn't have religion in it. The book is a Christian book, because I believe only true healing can come through the hand of Jesus Christ. He is the one that can integrate the personalities, can bring wholeness to the person through the act of forgiving, removing the scars, the pain that has caused the disassociation, by healing the things that have broke the continuum, causing the dissociative continuum to be placed in the person. He can bridge those things. He can bring the healing that's needed. He can bring the peace and the joy and make the person complete and whole. This lecture is going to be on the 6 sources of identity. A person's identity is how they picture themselves. It's what you believe to be true about yourself. It also includes those things that you believe others believe about you, what you believe others see when they look at you, what you believe others will think about you before you even get there, and how they'll perceive you when you are there. You have 6 sources from where your identity will be created. The identity is created in the very early years of an individual's life. It's part of the schema. The identity itself is the result of the filtration process of the value system and the beliefs that the person has. Now, when dealing with a high-level disassociate, we need to understand they will have multiple identities. They will project what they believe to be true about that specific identity. When they switch alternate personalities, they will have a different perception, and they will live according to that perception. I remember a man that weighed 350 pounds who, when he would switch to this alter that he had called Leo, even though he had short hair, it was thin and brown, he actually believed that his hair was long, thick, and blonde like a lion's mane. He also believed that he was a chiseled in features bodybuilder. Now, there had been a short period in his life where he was in incredibly good shape, but that had been 20 years previously. This identity was so confirmed within his psyche that when he would look in the mirror, because I had him look in the mirror to see if that's what he saw, and he absolutely saw that. He saw himself as having long hair, and he called himself eye candy. When this alter would come out, he would prance around, he would hit on women, he would flirt with them, and he would really think that he was a gift to them. I'm using that as an example because in disassociation, the disassociate will believe things, and they will see themselves, even when they look into the mirror or reflection, in ways that are not true. This is because of depersonalization disorder. It used to be called Alice in Wonderland syndrome, based on Lewis Carroll's works of Alice in Wonderland, because of the distortion that a person can have about their own identity in the world around them. When a high-level disassociate has multiple personalities, each personality will see itself in a specific way, and it will live its life according to that. That's why it's important, especially when you run into people that have animal alters, is because when they switch to that animal alter, their mind will fully believe it is that animal. They will make the sounds of that animal. They'll do what's natural for that animal. And that's why it's also possible and very common, because of the balance of good and evil, to have within an individual both a very devoted Christian on one side and a satanic priestess on the other, or an Egyptian goddess Isis on the other side that practices magic. Because each personality is different and sees themselves as a whole that way. The mind will develop an identity. Let's get back on the subject of identity. It will develop its identity by molding and adapting itself to its surroundings. It does this not just to survive, but in order to thrive, especially as it matures in life. By thriving, I mean it not only wants to survive in the situation it is, but it wants to overcome it and be the best that it can in that situation. And starting off here, an identity is formed in the early years of life. Now, this is why it's important to understand, and I show in my book on page 18, I believe it is, let me take a look here. Page 18, Maslow's hierarchy of human needs. The child's identity, the person's identity, is formed typically within the first few years. The foundation of it is. And the first layer of that, the Maslow's hierarchy, is called the physiological needs. For instance, a person needs to be able to breathe in order to live. And you say, well, Pastor Tom or Dr. Knotts, why would you say something so simple? It's almost idiotic. Well, let me pose this question to you. If you deprive a person of the ability to breathe, it will affect their identity. And in a designed intellect, or a person whose mind has been cultivated and molded by an individual for a specific need, in other words, mind control programming, they will deprive a person, for specific design, of oxygen. And they do this in order to split the mind, but also to create a desperation within the brain, the autonomic part of the brain stem, to where the survival mechanisms are there, so that that brain will become compliant and it will create an identity that is necessary. It is not uncommon for them to be deprived of food, of water. Maslow's first layer is the physiological needs, and he has on it breathing, food, water, sex. That is a primal need. Sleep, homeostasis, excretion, the ability to get rid of fluids from the body. In mind control programming, in cult homes where they actually split the child and condition the child, you will find that each one of these areas are controlled. And they control them in order to manipulate and form within the person identities that they are trying to create. On top of these needs, because these are primal needs that a person has in order to survive, if they are met, the person will have a solid foundation. If a person is never deprived of breathing but has a wholesome life where they've had food, water, shelter, where they've not been sexually molested or manipulated, but they've been able to develop naturally, where they have sleep, they get regular sleep on a basis. I mean, children that are deprived of sleep, that's why it's a very bad parent that doesn't give their child a good 8 hours of sleep each night by starting a routine and keeping a routine, because the body needs sleep. That does not have homeostasis, which is the ability for the body to be at rest and to regulate itself in a proper way so it functions to the way it was designed by the Creator. That is not allowed to excrete. If a child has had all these needs met, and they have been met in a wholesome way to where there's been no interruption or break within them, they will have a solid foundation. Their identity will not be split. They will have a single mind, a single personality, a single person, a single mind. When these basic needs are not met and there is a break in them, it will cause a break within the psyche. The result will be a break in the continuum, causing a dissociative continuum, which can result in detachment, depersonalization, psychogenic fugue or amnesia. It can cause any one of the aspects of disassociation to occur. On top of that, the second level is security. Security of body, employment, resources, morality, family, health, property. On top of that is the need for friendship, family, sexual intimacy, belonging. Each aspect of that pyramid is based on the first layer, which is the foundation, which is the primal needs in order to survive. Your identity will be based upon these things. And that's why it's important to understand, especially when working with a disassociate, or this actually trickles over and very much is a part of working with somebody who has a marred self-image. For instance, anorexia, bulimia. That's the result of a marred self-image. Sexual identity crisis. Sexual identity confusion, gender confusion. These are all aspects of a marred identity. Christ can heal those. As a counselor, an individual, somebody that may be suffering from this, if you find the root cause, what it is that caused the break in the continuum, or what caused the mind to be divided, you can bring healing to that area. And when you remove the wedge from the psyche, the conscious will reintegrate. The identities will merge and become one. And that's the important thing to understand in bringing healing to somebody whose mind has been split or who has a marred self-image. The identity itself is the result of both nature and nurture. You cannot control some of the things that happen naturally. For instance, if a very young child, an infant or a toddler, is involved in a car wreck, and the parents can't control what happens in a traumatic situation like that. Say, for instance, the car veers off and goes underwater and the child is deprived of oxygen for a short period of time and has to be resuscitated. That will cause a break in the continuum, and it can cause disassociation. You can have a personality that's formed. Now, if it's a minuscule one that's not developed by being tapped into or drawn out, as the child matures, then it will become what's called a fragment or a shell identity. But if it is something that is tapped into or that gets pulled forward on a regular basis, then it will develop into a full-blown personality or identity. Your identity is the result of both nature and nurture. Nature is the genetic and spiritual influences that are passed down from our biological parents. It includes both generational blessings and cursings. And it also includes all the influences of the natural and spiritual world around the person. There is a demonic realm. There is an angelic realm all around us, of fallen angels, of elect angels. The demonic angels, demons, try to influence people in a way that drives them into darkness and separates them from God. That's their nature, that's their primary and only position of existence, is for separating people from the power of God. Nature is a very strong concept, and it has a great deal of influence on the developing identity. Nurture also is a very powerful part. Nurture involves everything from conception on up. For instance, when a child is in the womb, what most people don't understand, but what affects the mother will affect the child. A mother that is placed into a traumatic or a duressful situation, she'll release hormones and enzymes, and it'll affect the child because the bloodstream of the mother is the same as the bloodstream of the child. So it's important to understand that the predisposition to disassociate can be activated while in the womb. Now, nature is the genetic dispositions that a person has. There is, within individuals, a predisposition towards disassociation. A family line, for instance, like the Jewish or African or any family line that has a history of basically duress, trauma, stress, strong sorrows, will develop what's called a genetic predisposition to disassociate. Within the actual genetic chain, the person will have as a survival coping mechanism, one of its number one choices will be to disassociate in order to deal with trauma, neglect, or duress. If a child is in the womb and the mother goes under duress, trauma, a stressful situation, explosion, something that frightens her, yelling all the time, it will affect the child. And an infant, a neonatal infant, can disassociate even before it comes out of the womb. And I know that's hard to believe, but the developing mind can be split while in the womb, creating two, a complete left and a complete right hemisphere personality or identity. One side, typically it's always the right in females, will hold all the negativity that happens. So this will begin from the onset of a person's life, creating separate identities. Now, back on the subject of a developing identity. It's these influences that will cause and create the foundation of what will be a person's psyche. A psyche is that which is the mindset of the identity. There are 6 components that come together to create a person's identity. The first is the world. The world is composed of its inhabitants, of the components of it, for instance, the animal kingdom, plant kingdom, and the philosophies of the world. Not just the human, but also those of nature. Some people are raised in a very natural environment to where they don't see humans, they're raised around animals primarily. This will affect and mold the person's identity and their psyche, that which their mind projects. The flesh, the person's own flesh, it has needs, it has desires. Whether those are fulfilled, whether they are not, will affect the way that that mind, the psyche, is projected and the identity that is created. The devil has a lot more influence on people than most want to recognize. The fallen angelic realm will seek to mold an individual to use it for their own capacity. Adolf Hitler was the culmination of nature, nurture, his environment, but also the strong influences of the kingdom of darkness. And as a result, he was used mightily by the kingdom of darkness. A person's family unit. This is one of the strongest components, if not the strongest components, in the formation of an identity and the psyche that will be projected. The absence of a family unit also, strongest of units. Whether a child is cared for, whether it feels loved, accepted, wanted, desired, needed, will all have effects upon it. In stoic families, in families where they have a designed intellect, often they will not hold the child or the infant. They will cause the infant pain. They will do whatever it takes to cause detachment, depersonalization, and dissociative disorders. A person will be affected in their identity and their psyche by God and His Word. God has written His name on every person's heart. He is the Creator. And just like every masterpiece is signed, people can't escape the fact that there's a real God and He has a desire for them. God and His Word will affect the identity, the way it develops, the psyche that is projected. Now, the absence of God's Word will also affect. Children that are raised not believing in God, or in a home that says it's Christian or God-fearing, but yet lives in the opposite way. It will all affect the way that identity is developed. Causing chaos and confusion around God and His Word can do some of the greatest damage, but also is the strongest molding contributors in establishing an identity, and as well as affecting the beliefs and values from which the psyche will project it later on in life. Lastly, genetic predispositions. As I put in the book, some people will argue that, but genetic amount of influence in the way that identity is developed. The Bible is very plain. The spirit of the sin of the fathers has the legal authority to affect the children all the way down to the grandchildren and great-grandchildren of those that hate him or have turned aside from him. Spiritual blessings. I mean, the prayer of Jabez went viral. One simple line, a simple sentence prayer, but yet it affected profoundly his family. Blessings can be passed on, but also can curses. Generational curses, negativity, conditioning by the way a family raises its child will affect the genetic predispositions. So those are the 6 areas that will affect a person's identity in molding it. In the next video, I will go into a deeper understanding on these 6 areas. Father, I do pray and ask that you'd bless this time. I pray that you would open everyone's eyes to these simple truths about a person's identity and how they're formed. In Christ's name I pray. Amen.